What if one of Africa's poorest nations stopped waiting for foreign investors, international lenders, and multinational corporations to shape its future? What if ordinary citizens became the owners of the factories, farms, and industries that power their economy? That is exactly the experiment unfolding in Burkina Faso under Captain Ibrahim Traore. While many African countries continue to rely heavily on foreign capital to finance development, Burkina Faso is attempting something far more ambitious. Through a program known as Popular Shareholding, hundreds of thousands of citizens are being invited to become direct stakeholders in national economic projects. For decades, Africa has faced a painful contradiction. The continent possesses enormous natural wealth, yet many countries remain dependent on exporting raw materials while importing finished products at higher prices. Burkina Faso has not escaped this reality. The country produces agricultural goods, livestock, and gold. Yet much of the value generated from those resources has historically left the country. Traore's response is built around a simple but powerful question. If Burkina Faso has resources, workers, farmers, and entrepreneurs, why should it always wait for outsiders to finance its development? This question challenges one of the most common assumptions about economic growth in Africa. Rather than asking who will invest in Burkina Faso, the government is asking how Burkinabe citizens can invest in themselves. The goal is not only to raise money, it is to transform the role of citizens within the economy. Instead of remaining consumers, taxpayers, and workers, they are encouraged to become shareholders and co-owners of national development projects. If you enjoy exploring bold economic ideas that could reshape Africa's future, make sure to subscribe and join us for more stories like this. Popular shareholding did not appear out of nowhere. Although many international observers describe it as a new economic experiment, its roots reach deep into African traditions and Burkina Faso's own history. For generations, communities across West Africa survived through collective effort. Families worked shared fields, cared for communal livestock, and contributed labor to projects that benefited everyone. Wealth was often understood not only as an individual achievement, but also as a collective responsibility. The success of one household strengthened the entire community. Supporters of popular shareholding argue that Ibrahim Traore is adapting this traditional spirit to the modern economy. Instead of asking villagers to work together on a communal farm, the model encourages citizens to pool financial resources and become shareholders in enterprises that serve national development goals. The intellectual foundation of this idea is also linked to long-standing debates about African economic independence. Thinkers such as Laurent Bedo promoted the concept of community entrepreneurship as a way to mobilize local resources rather than relying exclusively on external funding. Their argument was simple. A nation that cannot finance its own productive sectors will struggle to control its own future. Many observers also see echoes of the philosophy associated with Thomas Sankara. During the 1980s, Sankara emphasized self-reliance, local production, and dignity through work. While the economic tools are different today, the underlying message remains familiar. Development should begin with the people themselves. What makes Traore's approach unique is the attempt to transform a cultural value into a modern financial mechanism. Citizens are not simply encouraged to support development in theory. They are invited to participate directly through ownership. This distinction matters. A factory funded by community shareholders is viewed differently from one financed entirely by foreign investors. For supporters, it creates a stronger connection between economic growth and national responsibility. The project becomes more than a business venture. It becomes a symbol of collective ambition and shared destiny. At first glance, Many people compare Ibrahim Traore's economic vision to the model that helped transform Norway into one of the wealthiest nations in the world. Both approaches begin with a similar principle. National resources should benefit the population rather than a small elite or foreign interests. Norway used revenues from its oil and gas sector to build a massive national wealth fund. The state collected and managed those resources on behalf of the population, creating long-term financial security for future generations. It is often presented as one of the most successful examples of resource management in modern history. Burkina Faso shares the same desire for economic sovereignty, but Traore is attempting something fundamentally different. Instead of relying primarily on the state to manage wealth for citizens, he is encouraging citizens to become direct participants in the creation of that wealth. This distinction may seem subtle, but it changes the entire relationship between people and the economy. In the traditional model, citizens benefit indirectly through public services, infrastructure, and government spending. In the Burkinabe model, citizens are invited to become shareholders in projects that seek to generate economic value. Supporters argue that this approach goes beyond ownership on paper. It creates a sense of responsibility and engagement. When people own a stake in a factory, an agricultural project, or a mining enterprise, they may feel a stronger interest in its success. Traore's innovation lies in combining modern investment mechanisms with a community-centered culture. Rather than copying a European model, he has adapted the principle of shared prosperity to local realities. The goal is not merely to distribute wealth after it is created. The goal is to involve citizens in creating that wealth from the beginning. For this reason, many observers believe Burkina Faso is not building a version of Norway. It is attempting to create something uniquely African, shaped by its own history, traditions, and development challenges. Turning an idea into reality required more than speeches and patriotic slogans. To make popular shareholding work, Burkina Faso needed an institution capable of organizing investments, managing subscriptions, and connecting citizens to national development projects. That institution became the Agency for the Promotion of Community Entrepreneurship, widely known as APEC. Created in 2023, APEC was designed to provide the legal and operational framework for community-owned enterprises. Its mission is straightforward but ambitious. It seeks to mobilize domestic savings, identify productive projects, and channel citizen investments into sectors considered essential for national development. One of the most remarkable aspects of the program is its accessibility. Participation is not reserved for wealthy investors or large corporations. Farmers, workers, retirees, small business owners, students, and members of the diaspora can all become shareholders. This broad participation is central to the philosophy behind the initiative. Economic transformation should involve the population as a whole, rather than a limited group of elites. The response has been significant. Hundreds of thousands of Burkinabe citizens have joined the program, while billions of CFA francs have been mobilized to support community enterprises. These figures suggest that many people are willing to contribute financially when they believe they have a direct stake in the outcome. The participation of the diaspora has also played an important role. Burkinabe citizens living abroad are encouraged to invest in projects from their countries of residence, allowing them to contribute to development without returning home permanently. For supporters, the success of APEC is measured by more than the money collected. It represents a shift in mentality. Citizens are no longer viewed simply as beneficiaries of development programs. They are becoming partners in the process. Whether this model ultimately succeeds or fails, it has already changed the conversation about who should finance the future of Burkina Faso. The true test of any economic vision is not the number of speeches delivered or the amount of money collected. The real test is whether tangible results appear on the ground. In Burkina Faso, supporters of popular shareholding point to a growing list of projects that aim to prove the model can move from theory to reality. One of the most visible examples is the development of tomato processing facilities. For years, Burkina Faso produced large quantities of tomatoes, yet the country still depended heavily on imported tomato products. This situation reflected a broader challenge faced by many African economies. Raw materials were produced locally, but much of the value-added processing occurred elsewhere. The new factories seek to change that equation. Instead of exporting agricultural products in their raw form, Burkina Faso aims to process more of them domestically. Supporters believe this approach can create jobs, strengthen local industries, and reduce dependence on imported goods. Agriculture is not the only target. The broader program also includes agricultural mechanization initiatives, centralized purchasing systems for agricultural products, and semi-mechanized mining projects. Each project is designed around the same principle. Resources generated within the country should contribute more directly to national prosperity. The expected benefits extend beyond production figures. New industries can create employment opportunities for young people, provide more stable markets for farmers, and encourage additional investment in local supply chains. Instead of exporting value, the country seeks to retain more of it within its borders. For many citizens, these projects represent something larger than economic development. They symbolize the possibility of transforming Burkina Faso from a supplier of raw materials into a producer of finished goods. Whether that transformation succeeds remains to be seen. But the ambition behind it is undeniable. It is an attempt to build industrial growth with the participation of the people themselves. Not everyone is convinced that popular shareholding will deliver the results its supporters expect. As the program gains attention, it has also attracted criticism from international observers, economists, and commentators who question whether such an ambitious experiment can succeed over the long term. One concern involves governance. Critics argue that collecting money from hundreds of thousands of citizens is only the beginning. The greater challenge is ensuring that projects are managed efficiently, transparently, and profitably. Without strong oversight, public trust could be damaged. Others point to financial risk. Any investment carries uncertainty, and not every factory, agricultural enterprise, or mining project will automatically become successful. Some observers worry that ordinary citizens could face disappointment if certain projects fail to meet expectations. Supporters of the initiative respond that risk exists in every development strategy. They argue that dependence on foreign loans, external aid, and imported products also carries significant risks. From this perspective, popular shareholding is not risk-free, but neither is the status quo. Another criticism is that community-owned enterprises may struggle to compete against large international corporations. Yet supporters note that many successful industrial nations protected and supported domestic industries during their early stages of development. Ultimately, the debate reflects two different visions of economic progress. One emphasizes integration into existing global financial structures. The other seeks to build stronger domestic ownership and control over productive sectors. Whether popular shareholding becomes a historic success or an important lesson remains uncertain. What is clear is that Burkina Faso has opened a conversation that extends far beyond its borders. The question is no longer whether Africans can participate in development. The question is whether they can become owners of it. Whether popular shareholding ultimately succeeds or fails will only be known years from now. Economic transformation is never measured in months. It is measured in generations. Yet even at this early stage, the experiment taking place in Burkina Faso has already captured attention across Africa because it challenges assumptions that many people considered unquestionable for decades. Development discussions often focused on attracting foreign investment, securing international loans, and obtaining external assistance. Ibrahim Traore has not rejected cooperation with the outside world, but he has placed a different question at the center of the conversation. What happens when citizens themselves become investors in national development? That question may prove to be the most important aspect of this entire project. Factories can be built, programs can change, governments can come and go, but a population that begins to see itself as an owner rather than a spectator may develop a completely different relationship with the economy. The broader lesson for Africa is not that every country should copy Burkina Faso's model exactly. Each nation has its own history, institutions, and challenges. The lesson is that development becomes more powerful when people feel personally connected to it. Citizens are more likely to support economic transformation when they believe they share both the responsibility and the rewards. Captain Ibrahim Traore is attempting to turn that idea into reality by linking ownership, participation, and industrial development. He is testing a model that many countries have discussed, but few have attempted on such a scale. History will determine whether this vision fulfills its promise. Yet, one fact is already clear. Burkina Faso has launched one of the most closely watched economic experiments in modern Africa. For supporters of Pan-African development, Africa New Thinking, Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traore, the African Union, Pan-Africanism, and Ibrahim Traore's vision of economic sovereignty. The outcome could influence debates across the continent for years to come. If you enjoyed this analysis, subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts below. Your perspective may be part of the conversation shaping Africa's future for decades. Burkina Faso watched billions of dollars in gold leave its soil, while much of the country remained trapped in poverty. Foreign mining corporations controlled the richest gold fields, exported enormous profits overseas, and left behind a nation still struggling with weak infrastructure, unemployment, and insecurity. It was one of Africa's most painful contradictions, a country rich in natural wealth, yet unable to fully benefit from it. Now, that system is being challenged by one man who has become one of the most controversial and talked about leaders in Africa today. Captain Ibrahim Traore is attempting something many previous governments never seriously tried. He wants Burkina Faso's gold to serve Burkina Faso first. Under Traore's military administration, the government has expanded state ownership in strategic mines, tightened mining laws, increased local control, and pushed foreign companies out of positions they dominated for decades. Supporters call it an economic revolution. Critics call it dangerous resource nationalism. But whether the world likes it or not, Burkina Faso is rewriting the rules of who controls African wealth. At the same time, the country remains locked in a brutal conflict against armed extremist groups across the Sahel. For Traore, gold is no longer just an export commodity. It has become a weapon of economic survival and national sovereignty. And what is happening in Burkina Faso may not stay in Burkina Faso. Across Africa, more governments are beginning to ask the same question. Who should truly benefit from Africa's resources? If you want to understand where Africa's future may be heading next, this is a story you cannot afford to ignore. Before Ibrahim Traore came to power, Burkina Faso's gold industry was dominated by foreign corporations for decades. International mining companies from Canada, Australia, and Europe controlled some of the country's most productive gold mines, while billions of dollars in profits flowed out of the nation every year. Meanwhile, Many communities living near the mines still struggled with poverty, poor roads, weak healthcare systems, and limited economic opportunity. To many people inside Burkina Faso, it created a painful reality. The country was rich underground, but poor above it. Gold eventually became Burkina Faso's largest export. Yet, despite producing huge amounts of gold, the average citizen saw very little change in daily life. Foreign firms often handled the extraction, transportation, refining, and export process, while local participation remained limited. In many cases, Burkina Faso received taxes and royalties, but the larger share of long-term profits stayed in foreign hands. This model was defended by international investors, who argued they provided technology, expertise, security, and financing that Burkina Faso could not easily provide on its own. But critics inside Africa increasingly viewed the system differently. Many believed it resembled a modern version of economic dependency, where African nations supplied raw materials while outside powers captured most of the wealth. That frustration slowly grew across the Sahel. In Burkina Faso, people began asking difficult questions. How could a country produce so much gold while millions still lacked electricity and jobs? Why were foreign corporations becoming wealthier while local communities remained underdeveloped? By the time Ibrahim Traore emerged as the country's new military leader, anger toward the old mining system had already become deeply rooted. He did not create the frustration. He inherited it. But unlike previous governments, Traore decided to turn that frustration into political action. For many of his supporters, the battle over gold was no longer only about economics. It was about dignity, sovereignty, and who truly owned Burkina Faso's future. When Ibrahim Traore seized power in 2022, many outside observers focused on the military dimension of his leadership. But inside Burkina Faso, another transformation was beginning to take shape. Traore was preparing to challenge the economic structure that had controlled the country's gold industry for decades. His government moved quickly to increase state authority over strategic mining assets. New mining reforms expanded government participation in major gold projects, while local investors gained larger ownership stakes in industrial mines. Reports indicated that 6 of Burkina Faso's 15 active industrial gold mines had shifted into majority Burkinab ownership. 3 of them reportedly came under direct state control. That change was historic. Before Traore's administration, only 1 industrial gold mine in the country had been controlled by a local company. In just a few years, the balance of power inside Burkina Faso's mining sector began to shift dramatically away from foreign corporations. Traore framed the issue in simple but powerful language. Burkina Faso's gold, he argued, should first benefit Burkina Faso's people. That message resonated deeply across a population exhausted by insecurity, poverty, and decades of economic frustration. Supporters viewed the reforms as the beginning of a new era of economic sovereignty. To them, Traore was not simply changing mining contracts. He was attempting to dismantle an entire system that allowed African resources to enrich outside powers, while local populations remained dependent and vulnerable. The government also tightened mining regulations, increased state participation requirements, and pushed for greater local involvement in production and logistics. Foreign companies began facing stricter oversight and growing political pressure. Critics warned that these moves could scare away investment and weaken confidence in Burkina Faso's economy. But Traore's supporters responded with a different question. If the previous system was truly working, why did one of Africa's most resource-rich nations remain trapped in crisis? For many Burkinabe citizens, the gold industry was no longer just about business. It had become a symbol of national control, pride, and independence. Traore's strategy was never only about taking control of gold mines. The larger goal was to keep more of the gold profits inside Burkina Faso instead of allowing billions of dollars to leave the country every year. To support that vision, the government reportedly began building a state-backed investment structure known as Sinaiji, a name that translates roughly to preparing for tomorrow. The idea behind the project was straightforward but ambitious. When global gold prices rise, the state would save and reinvest part of the profits rather than immediately spending everything on short-term needs. According to government officials, the money could be directed into roads, electricity systems, industrial facilities, and national infrastructure projects. Burkina Faso also hopes to strengthen local manufacturing capacity and reduce dependence on imported goods over time. For decades, many African countries exported raw materials while importing finished products from abroad. Gold left Africa. Wealth often followed, but industrial capacity remained weak. Traore's supporters argue that Burkina Faso must break that cycle if it wants real economic independence. The government's mining reforms are therefore connected to a much larger economic vision. Gold is being treated not only as a source of export revenue, but also as the foundation for national reconstruction. Officials believe that if resource profits remain inside the country, Burkina Faso could gradually build stronger institutions, stronger industries, and eventually a stronger middle class. At the same time, rising global gold prices have made this strategy even more important. Every increase in the value of gold potentially means more money for infrastructure, public investment, and state development. Supporters describe this as one of the boldest economic experiments in modern Sahel history. Critics remain skeptical and question whether the government can manage such large financial resources effectively, but for many ordinary citizens, the central message is simple. For the first time in decades, Burkina Faso is attempting to use its gold wealth to build Burkina Faso itself. While Burkina Faso was restructuring its gold industry, the country was also fighting one of the most dangerous security crises in Africa. Armed extremist groups linked to regional insurgencies continued attacking villages, military positions, and transportation routes across the Sahel. Entire communities were displaced, thousands of civilians were killed, and large parts of the country remained unstable. For Ibrahim Traore's government, this changed the meaning of gold completely. Gold was no longer just a valuable export. It became a financial lifeline for national survival. The government needed money to pay soldiers, secure mining regions, purchase military equipment, and maintain state operations during a prolonged conflict. In this environment, every ounce of gold carried strategic importance. Control over mining revenue meant control over the country's ability to defend itself. At the same time, Burkina Faso dramatically increased gold production. Reports suggested the country produced a record 94 tons of gold in 2025, a major rise from previous years. Government officials credited tighter state oversight, stronger mining reforms, and more aggressive crackdowns on gold smuggling networks. For years, large quantities of gold reportedly disappeared through illegal trade routes crossing neighboring borders. That meant lost tax revenue and billions of dollars escaping state control. Under Traore's administration, security forces increased efforts to monitor transportation routes and reduce illegal exports. Supporters argue that these measures are helping Burkina Faso recover wealth that previously vanished outside official systems. Critics warn that conflict and instability still threaten long-term mining operations. Both sides agree on one reality. Gold now sits at the center of Burkina Faso's future. This is why Traore often presents the mining sector as part of a larger national struggle. In his view, economic sovereignty and military survival cannot be separated. Without control over resources, Burkina Faso may never have the financial strength needed to stabilize the country and rebuild after years of violence. As Burkina Faso pushed deeper into resource nationalism, reactions from Western governments, international investors, and foreign mining corporations became increasingly tense. For decades, Global mining companies operated across Africa under systems that gave them major influence over extraction, exports, and long-term profits. Now, leaders like Ibrahim Traore are challenging that structure directly. Foreign investors worry that Burkina Faso's policies could create uncertainty throughout Africa's mining sector. Nationalization fears, changing regulations, and stronger state intervention make international companies nervous about long-term investments worth billions of dollars. Some firms fear that if Burkina Faso's strategy succeeds, other African governments may attempt similar reforms. That possibility could reshape the balance of power across global mining markets. Critics also argue that Burkina Faso may lack the technical expertise, infrastructure, and financial transparency required to manage large mining operations efficiently without heavy foreign involvement. Others warn that political instability and ongoing conflict could scare away international capital at a time when the country still needs outside investment. But supporters of Traore answer those criticisms with a different argument. They ask why Burkina Faso remained poor after decades of foreign-dominated mining. If the old system was truly fair and effective, why did many mining communities still lack roads, electricity, clean water, and economic opportunity? To Traore's supporters, this is not simply a debate about business climate. It is a debate about sovereignty itself. They believe African nations should no longer export enormous wealth while remaining dependent on foreign powers economically. Still, the reality is more complicated than simple slogans. Burkina Faso cannot fully isolate itself from the global economy. The country still needs technology, equipment, financing, and international trade relationships. The challenge now is finding a balance between attracting investment and protecting national control over strategic resources. That balance may ultimately determine whether Traore's economic revolution becomes a lasting model for Africa or another ambitious experiment that struggles under pressure from both inside and outside the continent. What Ibrahim Traore is doing in Burkina Faso has become much bigger than a mining policy. Across Africa, many people now see him as the symbol of a new generation demanding stronger control over African resources and African wealth. Supporters often compare Traore to Thomas Sankara because both leaders speak about sovereignty, self-reliance, and economic independence. Instead of presenting gold as only a business issue, Captain Ibrahim Traore has turned it into a national symbol tied to dignity and survival. That message has spread quickly across Pan-African communities and social media platforms. Many young Africans believe their countries remained poor for too long, while foreign companies benefited from Africa's gold, oil, uranium, and minerals. Traore's rise has forced many people to ask a difficult question. Who truly owns Africa's wealth? For supporters, Burkina Faso is attempting to break an old system where African nations exported raw resources while outside powers captured most of the profits. Whether Traore succeeds or fails, many believe he has already changed the political conversation across the continent. Still, the challenges facing Burkina Faso remain enormous. The country continues fighting insecurity, economic pressure, and limited industrial capacity. Resource control alone cannot guarantee prosperity. Burkina Faso will still need strong institutions, transparency, infrastructure, and long-term economic planning. Even so, Ibrahim Traore has already become one of the most influential political figures in modern Africa. His government has transformed gold into a symbol of Pan-Africanism, sovereignty, and economic resistance. Today, Burkina Faso stands at the center of a growing continental debate about ownership, independence, and Africa's new economic future. Many within the African Union now understand that the future of the continent may depend on whether African nations can control not only their borders, but also the resources beneath their soil. And for many supporters across Africa, that future may already be beginning in Burkina Faso with Ibrahim Traore. West Africa has just witnessed a move so bold that many analysts believe it could reshape the financial future of the entire Sahel region. Burkina Faso, under the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traore, has officially tightened state control over the country's gold sector through a powerful new mechanism known as FSMIB. And according to many observers, this is not just another mining reform, this is the beginning of a new economic doctrine. For decades, African gold has flowed out of the continent while roads remained broken, bridges unfinished, and entire communities trapped in poverty. Foreign corporations extracted billions of dollars worth of minerals while ordinary citizens saw little change in their daily lives. But now, Burkina Faso says that era must end. The government in Ouagadougou is building a system where gold will no longer simply leave the country in exchange for temporary revenue. Instead, the state wants to control the buying process, control the reserves, control the profits, and use those profits to build roads, bridges, electricity networks, and national infrastructure directly inside Burkina Faso. What makes this story even more explosive is that many experts now believe FSMIB could eventually evolve into a gold-backed national financial institution, something that could completely change how Sahel nations finance development in the future. Supporters are calling it revolutionary leadership. Critics are calling it dangerous nationalism. And Western powers are watching very carefully as Burkina Faso attempts to create a financial system built on its own natural resources rather than foreign dependence. Today, we are going to break down exactly what Burkina Faso is doing, why the world is paying attention, and why this decision could become one of the most important economic experiments in modern African history. And if you enjoy deep analysis about Africa's future, be sure to subscribe and join our growing community. FSMIB is not just a mining fund. What Burkina Faso is building may become one of the most aggressive attempts in modern African history to reclaim control over national wealth from foreign influence. At the center of this strategy is one simple idea. Gold produced in Burkina Faso must first benefit Burkina Faso. For decades, the traditional model worked very differently. Foreign mining corporations extracted gold from African soil, exported it abroad, and earned massive profits on international markets. African governments often received taxes and royalties, but the largest financial gains remained outside the continent. Captain Ibrahim Traore's administration now wants to reverse that system completely. Through FSMIB, the government plans to buy gold directly from local miners and state-connected mining operations using a nationally controlled reference price. That gold can then be stored, managed, or sold internationally when global prices rise. The profit generated from the difference between local acquisition prices and international market prices would then flow back into the country through infrastructure investment. This is the part that has captured attention across West Africa. Burkina Faso is not saying gold should simply be exported faster. The government is saying gold should become the engine of national transformation. Roads, bridges, electricity systems, industrial projects, and transport infrastructure could all be financed through the country's own mineral wealth. Another important element is the expansion of state participation in mining itself. Unlike some neighboring countries that still depend heavily on foreign-controlled extraction, Burkina Faso is increasing the role of state-owned mining entities such as SOPAMIB. This gives the government greater control over production, reserves, and long-term revenue planning. Supporters believe this is the beginning of economic sovereignty. To them, FSMIB represents something larger than mining policy. It represents the idea that African resources should finally finance African development instead of enriching foreign systems first. As Burkina Faso pushes forward with FSMIB, one question is now being asked across Africa, Europe, and international financial circles. Why is the West suddenly paying such close attention to a gold policy inside a relatively poor Sahel nation? The answer is simple. Burkina Faso is challenging a system that has existed for decades. For many years, the economic structure in large parts of West Africa depended heavily on foreign mining corporations, external financing institutions, and export systems controlled outside the continent. Gold was extracted locally, but the major financial networks connected to that gold often remained under foreign influence. FSMIB threatens to disrupt that structure by placing the state at the center of gold accumulation and profit distribution. This is exactly why some Western analysts and investors are becoming nervous. Critics argue that stronger state control over mining could discourage foreign investment. Others warn that government-managed systems sometimes suffer from corruption, inefficiency, and political interference. There are also fears that aggressive resource nationalism could isolate Burkina Faso economically or create instability in the mining sector. Some international observers even question whether Burkina Faso currently has the technical and financial capacity to manage such an ambitious strategy successfully over the long term. But supporters of the policy respond with a powerful counter-argument. They ask a very direct question. If the old system was truly benefiting Africa fairly, then why do many resource-rich African countries still struggle with weak infrastructure, unemployment, and dependency after decades of mineral exports? Supporters also point out that many powerful nations built their economies by controlling strategic resources. China used state-guided industrial policy. Gulf nations used oil wealth to build sovereign funds. Norway used energy revenues to create long-term national wealth. From this perspective, Burkina Faso is not doing something unusual. It is simply attempting to place national interests at the center of resource management. And that is why FSMIB has become far more than an economic policy. It has become a symbol of a growing African debate about sovereignty, control, and the future direction of development. What makes FSMIB even more fascinating is that many analysts believe Burkina Faso may not be building only a mining fund. They may be laying the foundation for an entirely new financial institution backed by gold itself. At first, that idea may sound extreme, but when you look closely at how the system is being designed, the logic starts to become very clear. Banks survive on reserves, deposits, and predictable flows of capital. FSMIB could eventually possess all three. The state plans to continuously accumulate gold from local miners and state-connected mining operations. That means the fund could gradually build a large reserve of physical assets with real international market value. Unlike paper currency, gold remains one of the world's most trusted stores of value during periods of inflation, economic instability, and geopolitical uncertainty. If Burkina Faso continues increasing state participation in gold production while centralizing gold purchases through FSMIB, the government could eventually create a powerful financial structure capable of funding national development directly. This is why some observers are now describing FSMIB as the possible beginning of a gold-backed national development bank for the Sahel. Such an institution could one day finance infrastructure projects, support domestic industries, stabilize strategic imports, provide development loan, and reduce dependence on foreign lenders. For supporters of Captain Ibrahim Traore, this possibility represents a historic turning point. They believe Burkina Faso is attempting to create a financial system where African resources finance African priorities instead of relying entirely on external institutions. Of course, This remains a long-term vision, and significant challenges still exist. Building a stable financial institution requires transparency, security, technical expertise, and consistent economic management. But even the discussion itself is already remarkable. For the first time in years, people across the Sahel are openly imagining what an independent African financial model could actually look like if it were built on local resources rather than foreign dependency. Burkina Faso's leaders understand something very important. Political independence means very little if a country still depends entirely on foreign financing to build its future. That is why FSMIB is closely connected to a much larger national ambition. The government wants to transform gold into roads, bridges, electricity systems, industrial infrastructure, and economic mobility across the country. For years, Burkina Faso has struggled with weak transportation networks and underdeveloped infrastructure. In many rural areas, damaged roads isolate communities during rainy seasons, slowing trade, agriculture, and access to essential services. Infrastructure has remained one of the biggest barriers to long-term economic growth. Under the traditional model, countries often borrowed heavily from institutions such as the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank to finance major projects. Those loans sometimes came with financial pressure, political conditions, and long repayment cycles. Captain Ibrahim Traore's administration appears determined to pursue a different path. The idea is simple but ambitious. Instead of using debt as the primary engine of development, Burkina Faso wants to use its own mineral wealth to finance national transformation from within. Supporters of FSMIB believe this approach could allow the country to gradually reduce dependence on external lenders while strengthening economic sovereignty. Every increase in gold revenue could potentially become a new road project, a bridge, an energy facility, or an industrial investment. To many Pan-African observers, this is the emotional core of the entire project. They see Burkina Faso attempting to turn natural resources into visible national progress rather than temporary export statistics. In their view, every truck carrying gold out of the country should eventually translate into infrastructure that improves the lives of ordinary citizens, whether the strategy fully succeeds or not. One thing is already clear. Burkina Faso is trying to redefine how resource wealth should serve the nation in the 21st century. Burkina Faso is not the first nation to realize that controlling strategic resources can change the destiny of a country. In many ways, the government of Captain Ibrahim Traore appears to be studying lessons that powerful nations used long before Africa began discussing economic sovereignty openly. One of the clearest examples is China. For decades, China invested heavily in state-guided industrial expansion while maintaining strong control over strategic sectors, including mining and resource extraction. Today, China remains one of the world's largest gold producers, supported by powerful state-connected mining corporations and long-term national planning. The lesson was never simply about extracting more gold. The lesson was about controlling the value chain, building reserves, financing infrastructure, and transforming natural resources into national power. Burkina Faso now appears to be applying parts of that logic to its own situation. This is also where the comparison with Ghana becomes important. Ghana has long been one of Africa's leading gold producers, but Burkina Faso is attempting something more aggressive through increased state participation and institutions like SOPAMIB and FSMIB. The goal is not only to benefit from exports, but to centralize strategic control over the gold economy itself. Supporters believe this difference matters enormously. In their view, countries do not become powerful simply because they possess natural resources. Many nations remain poor despite sitting on enormous mineral wealth. What truly matters is who controls the extraction, who controls the profits, and where those profits are invested. That is the larger message behind Burkina Faso's current strategy. Gold alone will not transform the country, but if managed effectively, gold could become the financial foundation for roads, industry, energy systems, and long-term national development controlled from within Africa itself. What Burkina Faso is attempting through FSMIB may ultimately become one of the defining economic stories of modern Africa. This is no longer only about mining policy or gold exports. It is about sovereignty, financial independence, and the right of a nation to decide how its own resources should shape its future. Captain Ibrahim Traore and his administration are sending a message that is being heard far beyond Ouagadougou. They are saying that African nations should not remain permanently dependent on foreign loans while sitting on enormous natural wealth beneath their soil. Instead, they believe those resources should finance roads, energy systems, industries, and national development directly from within Africa itself. Of course, the road ahead will not be easy. FSMIB still faces enormous challenges involving security, transparency, governance, and long-term economic stability. If the system is poorly managed, critics will point to it as proof that resource nationalism cannot work. But if Burkina Faso succeeds, even partially, the consequences could extend far beyond one country. Mali may study the model. Niger may adapt similar policies. Other nations across the continent may begin asking deeper questions about who truly benefits from Africa's resources. This is why the conversation around FSMIB has become so powerful. It touches the heart of modern Pan-African debates about ownership, dignity, and economic control. For many supporters of Pan-Africanism, Burkina Faso represents more than a country rich in gold. It represents the possibility of an Africa new generation of leadership willing to challenge old systems and imagine new paths forward. Whether history ultimately judges Captain Ibrahim Traore as a visionary or a risk-taker, one thing is certain. Ibrahim Traore has forced the world to pay attention to Burkina Faso and to the growing demand for African Union nations to control their own economic destiny. And if you believe Africa's future should be shaped by Africans themselves, subscribe to the channel and join us again for more deep analysis on the changing future of the continent. Have you noticed how quickly a story can spread once a powerful headline appears over the past few weeks? Many people have been told that Burkina Faso has seized a foreign gold mine, pushed aside investors, and took control of valuable resources by force. The story sounds dramatic. It sounds revolutionary. And for some, it sounds like proof that a young leader is willing to challenge the global system. But what if that is not what actually happened? What if the real story is far more interesting than the headlines? What if Burkina Faso did not seize a gold mine at all? What if the government used law, negotiation, and money to increase its ownership in one of the country's most important mining projects? Today, we are looking at the Kiaka gold mine and the decision that increased Burkina Faso's ownership from 10% to 40%. More importantly, we will examine why this move is being praised by supporters of Captain Ibrahim Traore and why it is attracting attention far beyond West Africa. By the end of this discussion, you may see this event not as a conflict over gold, but as a lesson about sovereignty, economics, and the future of Africa. And if you enjoy thoughtful stories about Africa's changing role in the world, be sure to follow the channel for more conversations like this. The Kiaka gold mine is one of the most important mining projects in Burkina Faso, operated by Australia's West African Resources. It represents a massive long-term investment with the potential to produce gold for decades. Under an agreement signed in 2019, Burkina Faso held only a 10% ownership stake. For many citizens, that arrangement raised an uncomfortable question. If the gold was located beneath Burkina Faso's soil, why was the nation receiving such a limited share of the ownership? That question would eventually become the center of a much larger national debate. The decision that changed everything did not begin at the mine. It began in the halls of government. One of the most important facts often left out of this story is that Ibrahim Traore was not the leader who signed the original 2019 agreement. When that deal was approved, Burkina Faso accepted a structure that granted the state a 10% ownership stake in the project. Years later, a different government and a different political climate emerged. In 2024, Burkina Faso introduced a new mining code designed to increase national participation in the country's natural resources. Supporters of the reform argued that the previous framework no longer reflected the interests of the nation. While foreign investment remained important, many believed that Burkina Faso deserved a stronger position in projects built upon its own resources. The new law introduced several significant changes. First, the government's automatic ownership share increased from 10% to 15%. Second, the state gained the legal right to purchase additional shares in mining operations. This was a crucial distinction. The law did not simply authorize confiscation. Instead, it created a mechanism through which the government could legally expand its participation. This difference matters more than many people realize. Around the world, governments regularly update tax laws, energy regulations, and resource policies. Oil-producing countries adjust petroleum contracts. Mining nations revise royalty structures. These actions may create new obligations for companies, but they are generally viewed as part of a country's sovereign right to manage its economy. Burkina Faso's leadership argued that mining should be treated the same way. The objective was not to punish investors. The objective was to ensure that the nation received a larger share of the value generated by its own resources. For supporters of Ibrahim Traore, the 2024 Mining Code represented something larger than a legal reform. It represented a shift in mindset. Instead of accepting agreements negotiated under previous conditions, Burkina Faso was choosing to redefine its economic future through legislation rather than confrontation. Whether one agrees with the policy or not, the process itself followed a legal path, and that legal foundation would soon become the basis for one of the most discussed mining decisions in Africa. Now we arrive at the most controversial part of the story. Many headlines suggested that Burkina Faso simply took a larger share of the Kiaka mine because it could. Critics described the move as government overreach. Some even called it a disguised nationalization. But when we examine the details, a very different picture begins to emerge. Burkina Faso did not receive the additional ownership for free. Under the new arrangement, the government agreed to pay approximately $125 million to acquire an additional 25% stake in the project. That payment transformed the entire discussion. Instead of a seizure, the transaction became a purchase. Instead of taking assets without compensation, the state was buying a larger position in a strategic national resource. This distinction is critical because ownership and control are not the same thing. The company would continue operating the mine. The company would continue using its expertise, equipment, and management systems. The project itself would continue moving forward. What changed was the distribution of economic benefits. For West African resources, the deal was not necessarily a disaster. The company received a substantial payment, and reports indicated that much of the proceeds could ultimately benefit shareholders through special distributions. In other words, investors were not simply losing value, they were receiving compensation for the shares being transferred. This is why many supporters of Ibrahim Traore reject the claim that Burkina Faso confiscated foreign property. In their view, the government followed a legal process, negotiated a transaction, and paid for the additional ownership. Whether one supports or opposes the policy, the facts suggest a negotiated purchase rather than a forced takeover. Perhaps the most important lesson is that sovereignty does not always arrive through confrontation. Sometimes it arrives through contracts, legislation, and financial transactions. Burkina Faso was not trying to destroy the system. It was attempting to secure a larger place within it. For many observers across Africa, that distinction makes all the difference. One of the strongest arguments in favor of Burkina Faso's approach is a simple question: if investors were truly being driven away, why are they still there? After the ownership restructuring was announced, West African Resources did not abandon the Kiaka project. The company did not shut down operations. It did not declare the investment impossible to continue. Instead, the mine remained active. Production plans continued, and long-term forecasts stayed positive. That reality tells us something important. Investors are not necessarily looking for a country where they receive every possible advantage. What they want most is predictability. They want to know the rules. They want to understand the risks. And above all, they want confidence that agreements will be respected within a clear legal framework. This is where Ibrahim Traore's strategy becomes particularly interesting. Rather than taking control through force, he used a legal mechanism established by the new mining code. The government negotiated a purchase, provided compensation, and allowed the company to retain a majority 60% stake. From a business perspective, that creates a very different message than outright nationalization. Of course, investors still have concerns. Any change in ownership structures can create uncertainty. Shareholders naturally ask whether similar changes might occur elsewhere. Financial markets do not like surprises. Yet there is a significant difference between uncertainty and panic. A company can adapt to a new ownership structure. A company can calculate new costs. A company can renegotiate future agreements. What businesses struggle to survive is the sudden loss of assets without compensation. That is not what happened at Kiaka. Supporters of Traore argue that he understands this distinction better than many critics assume. They believe he recognizes that foreign capital, technical expertise, and international partnerships remain important for Burkina Faso's development. The objective is not to remove investors from the country. The objective is to create a relationship where both sides benefit more equally. In that sense, the Kiaka Agreement may represent something larger than a mining deal. It may represent an attempt to balance national sovereignty with economic pragmatism. And in today's world, finding that balance is often far more difficult than making political speeches. What happened at Kiaka becomes even more interesting when we realize that Burkina Faso is not acting alone. Across Africa, governments are re-examining old assumptions about natural resources, foreign investment, and economic sovereignty. For decades, many African countries followed a familiar pattern. Valuable minerals were extracted, exported, and sold on global markets, yet local populations often saw limited benefits. Roads remained underdeveloped, schools lacked resources, hospitals struggled with funding. As a result, many citizens began asking a difficult question. If Africa is so rich in resources, why do so many resource-rich communities remain poor? Countries such as Mali, Tanzania, Niger, and Namibia have all explored ways to increase national participation in strategic sectors. While each country has its own approach, the underlying objective is remarkably similar. They want a larger share of the value generated from their natural wealth. Mali has focused on recovering unpaid revenues and revising mining agreements. Tanzania has strengthened local participation requirements and increased expectations for domestic economic benefits. Niger has pushed for greater influence over key resources. Namibia has emphasized retaining more value through local processing rather than exporting raw materials. The common theme is not isolation. The common theme is leverage. These governments are not necessarily rejecting foreign investment. Instead, they are seeking stronger bargaining positions within global markets. They want partnerships that create benefits for investors while also producing meaningful gains for local populations. This broader context helps explain why many Africans view the Kiaka Agreement as more than a business transaction. To them, it represents a wider movement toward economic self-determination. The discussion is no longer simply about who owns a gold mine. It is about who benefits from the wealth generated beneath African soil. Whether this movement succeeds remains to be seen. But one thing is clear. Across the continent, more governments are questioning agreements that once seemed untouchable. And for many supporters of Ibrahim Traore, that shift may be one of the most important developments in modern African economic history. Not everyone views Burkina Faso's actions positively. In fact, some of the strongest criticism has come from foreign analysts, investors, and commentators who worry about the long-term consequences of changing ownership structures in major resource projects. One criticism is that the country may be creating uncertainty for future investors. The argument is simple. If governments can increase their ownership after an agreement has been signed, companies may become more cautious about investing large amounts of money in the future. Others argue that moves like this are driven by politics rather than economics. They suggest that increasing state ownership is popular with the public, but may not necessarily produce long-term prosperity. According to this view, symbolic victories can sometimes distract from deeper economic challenges. These concerns deserve to be taken seriously. However, supporters of Burkina Faso's approach offer several important counter-arguments. First, the government did not seize the mine without compensation. It used a legal framework established through a new mining code and agreed to pay for the additional ownership. Second, the company remains the majority owner and continues operating the project. Third, the mine itself remains profitable, giving both sides an incentive to cooperate rather than fight. Perhaps the most important point is that there is a difference between rejecting investment and renegotiating the terms of participation. Burkina Faso is not saying that foreign companies are unwelcome. It is saying that the distribution of benefits should be more balanced. For supporters of Ibrahim Traore, this distinction changes the entire conversation. They see the Kiaka Agreement not as an attack on investment, but as an attempt to create a partnership where national interests and investor interests can coexist. Whether one agrees or disagrees, the debate is no longer about gold alone. It is about fairness, sovereignty, and the future relationship between Africa and the global economy. As we reach the end of this story, it becomes clear that the debate surrounding the Kiaka gold mine was never really about gold alone. At its heart, this is a story about ownership, sovereignty, and the right of a nation to shape its own economic future. Burkina Faso did not send soldiers to take over a foreign company. It did not shut down the mine. It did not remove investors and replace them overnight. Instead, it used legislation, negotiation, and financial compensation to increase its participation in one of its most valuable natural resources. Whether one supports Ibrahim Traore or not, the method deserves attention. In a world where conflicts over resources often become confrontational, Burkina Faso chose a path that combined legal authority with economic pragmatism. The government sought a larger share of the benefits while preserving the expertise, investment, and operational capacity that made the project successful in the first place. The larger lesson extends beyond Burkina Faso. Countries across Africa continue searching for ways to ensure that natural wealth creates opportunities for ordinary citizens. The ultimate goal is not simply to own more resources. The goal is to transform resource wealth into better schools, stronger hospitals, improved infrastructure, and greater economic independence. That is why the Kiaka Agreement has captured so much attention. To supporters, it represents a new chapter in the conversation about African development. A chapter where cooperation replaces dependency and negotiation replaces resentment. If you found this analysis valuable, be sure to follow the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe Burkina Faso found the right balance between national sovereignty and foreign investment? As discussions about Pan-African cooperation continue to grow, many supporters see Burkina Faso, Africa New, Captain Ibrahim Traore, the African Union, Pan-Africanism, and Ibrahim Traore himself as symbols of a broader conversation about Africa's future and its place in the global economy. For more than 60 years, Burkina Faso watched its wealth leave the country in its most basic form. Gold was dug from the ground but refined elsewhere. Cotton was harvested from the fields but turned into fabric in foreign factories. Farmers worked under the hot Sahel sun, yet much of the value created from their labor ended up thousands of miles away. Now imagine something different. Imagine a market of 1.4 billion consumers suddenly opening its doors to Burkina Faso. Imagine those doors opening without tariffs, without many of the barriers that have traditionally limited African exports. For many observers, that announcement from China was the headline. But the real story may not be happening in Beijing at all. The real story may be unfolding in Ouagadougou. Because while China was opening a market, Ibrahim Traore was preparing something else. He was preparing Burkina Faso to enter that market differently than before. Before we explore that possibility, it is important to understand what Burkina Faso has been trying to escape. For decades, the country followed a familiar pattern seen across much of Africa. Raw materials left. Wealth left with them. Cotton was exported as cotton. Gold was exported as gold. Agricultural products were exported with little processing. The countries that bought those resources often earned far more by refining, manufacturing, packaging, and selling finished products than Burkina Faso earned from producing the resources themselves. That reality created a painful contradiction. Burkina Faso was rich in resources but struggled to translate those resources into widespread prosperity. The problem was never the absence of wealth beneath the soil. The problem was the inability to capture enough value before that wealth crossed the border. Today, that may finally be starting to change. China's decision to grant zero-tariff access to African exports is being described by many economists as one of the most significant trade openings in modern African history. For Burkina Faso, the announcement was especially important because it offered something that previous generations rarely had: direct access to one of the largest consumer markets on Earth. A market of 1.4 billion people changes the conversation. For years, African nations were often told that development depended on aid packages, loans, or foreign assistance programs. China presented something different. Instead of offering a donation, it offered market access. Instead of promising support in the future, it reduced barriers that had previously made trade more difficult. That distinction matters. Aid can help solve temporary problems. Access to customers can create long-term economic growth. Under the new arrangement, products from Burkina Faso can enter China with significant advantages compared to many previous trade conditions. For farmers, exporters, and manufacturers, that creates opportunities that simply did not exist before. But it is important to understand what this policy does and does not do. Zero tariffs do not automatically make a country rich. They do not build factories. They do not train workers. They do not create industrial capacity. What they do is open a door. And history shows that open doors only benefit nations that are prepared to walk through them. This is why the story becomes much more interesting when we shift our attention from Beijing to Burkina Faso itself. China has provided access to the market. The question is what Burkina Faso intends to sell inside that market. If the country continues exporting mostly raw materials, the gains may be limited. Raw cotton, raw gold, and unprocessed agricultural products generate far less value than finished goods. But if Burkina Faso can export refined gold, textiles, processed foods, and manufactured products, then the impact of zero tariffs becomes far more powerful. The opportunity is real. The challenge is real as well. And that challenge is exactly where Ibrahim Traore enters the story. Ibrahim Traore appears to understand a reality that many resource-rich countries have struggled to overcome. Having valuable resources is not enough. The real question is, who captures the value created from those resources? For decades, Burkina Faso exported gold and cotton while most of the higher-value activities happened elsewhere. Refining, manufacturing, branding, packaging, and large-scale distribution were often controlled outside the country. As a result, Burkina Faso participated in global trade, but remained near the bottom of the value chain. Traore has repeatedly argued that this model cannot continue if the country hopes to achieve genuine economic sovereignty. His approach is built around a simple idea. Burkina Faso should not only extract resources, it should process them. One of the clearest examples is gold. Instead of sending large amounts of gold abroad for refining, the government has supported the creation of a national gold refinery. The goal is not merely symbolic. Refining gold inside Burkina Faso allows more economic activity to remain within the country. It creates jobs, develops technical expertise, improves oversight, and potentially increases government revenue. The same thinking is visible in the mining sector more broadly. Through state participation and greater control over strategic resources, the government is attempting to ensure that national wealth contributes more directly to national development. But perhaps the most important aspect of Traore's vision is not a specific project. It is a change in mindset. For generations, many African economies were encouraged to focus on extraction, produce raw materials, export them, import finished goods. Traore is challenging that formula. He is asking a different question. What happens when the country that grows the cotton also produces the fabric? What happens when the country that mines the gold also refines the gold? What happens when economic value stays closer to the people who create it? Those questions are becoming increasingly important because China has now opened a market that may reward countries capable of producing more than raw materials. And that is exactly why the next stage of Burkina Faso's strategy may prove even more important than the first. If gold represents Burkina Faso's mineral wealth, cotton represents its opportunity to build a modern industrial economy. For decades, Burkina Faso has been one of West Africa's major cotton producers. Every year, farmers grow and harvest cotton across the country. Yet the biggest profits have rarely stayed in Burkina Faso. The reason is simple. Cotton was often exported as a raw material. Once it left the country, the next stages of production happened elsewhere. Foreign factories turned cotton into yarn. Yarn became fabric. Fabric became clothing. Each step added value, created jobs, and generated profits outside Burkina Faso. This is the cycle that Ibrahim Traore wants to change. One of the most important symbols of that effort is the IRO Burkina textile project. The goal is not simply to build another factory. The goal is to create a larger industrial chain inside Burkina Faso. The vision follows a clear path. Cotton becomes yarn. Yarn becomes fabric. Fabric becomes finished products. Every stage creates additional value. Every stage creates more employment opportunities. Every stage allows more money to remain inside the national economy. This is how many successful manufacturing nations developed. They did not become wealthy simply because they possessed natural resources. They became wealthy because they learned how to process those resources themselves. The difference can be enormous. A single bale of cotton provides income mainly for the farmer who produces it. A textile industry supports farmers, factory workers, transport companies, technicians, managers, and exporters at the same time. That is why industrialization matters so much to Burkina Faso's future. And if China's tariff-free market remains open, Burkina Faso may eventually export textiles and finished products instead of raw cotton alone. If that happens, the country will not simply be selling resources. It will be selling value, jobs, and economic strength created at home. History is full of nations that missed great opportunities because they were not prepared when those opportunities arrived. Burkina Faso is attempting something different. At almost the exact moment China opened its market to African exports, Burkina Faso began taking steps to increase domestic processing, strengthen industrial capacity, and gain greater control over its resources. Whether by design or coincidence, these two developments are now intersecting in a way that could reshape the country's economic future. Think about the situation from a strategic perspective. China has created access to one of the largest consumer markets in the world. That opportunity alone is significant. But market access only becomes transformative when producers have something valuable to sell. This is where Traore's economic vision becomes important. The National Gold Refinery, textile projects, and efforts to expand local processing are all attempts to ensure that Burkina Faso enters global markets with higher value products rather than raw materials alone. In many ways, this is a story about preparation meeting opportunity. For decades, Burkina Faso had resources but lacked sufficient industrial capacity. Now, industrial capacity is beginning to emerge just as a major export market becomes more accessible. That combination does not guarantee success. There are still major challenges ahead. Factories must become productive. Workers must be trained. Infrastructure must improve. Investment must continue. But opportunities of this scale do not appear every generation. That is why many supporters of Traore believe the current moment may represent a historic turning point. Not because China is offering special favors, not because prosperity is guaranteed, but because Burkina Faso may finally have a chance to move from exporting what it has to exporting what it creates. China opened the door. Traore is trying to build the road that leads to it. And for the first time in many decades, those two developments are happening at the same time. Not everyone is convinced that Burkina Faso is moving in the right direction. Critics in Western policy circles often argue that the country may simply be replacing one dependency with another. According to this view, moving away from France while building closer economic ties with China does not automatically create economic sovereignty. It merely changes the identity of the external partner. Others argue that China is primarily interested in access to African resources and new markets for Chinese products. They point to trade imbalances and warn that African countries could remain suppliers of raw materials if they fail to industrialize. These concerns deserve serious consideration. However, there is another side to the debate. Every major power pursues its own interests. France did. Britain did. The United States does. China does as well. The real question is not whether China benefits. The real question is whether Burkina Faso benefits at the same time. That answer will depend on what happens inside Burkina Faso over the next several years. If the country continues exporting mainly raw gold, raw cotton, and unprocessed agricultural products, many critics may be proven correct. But if Burkina Faso succeeds in refining its gold, expanding textile production, and developing local processing industries, the outcome could look very different. In that scenario, China would not simply become a buyer of resources, it would become a customer for products carrying more value created inside Burkina Faso itself. Ultimately, the debate is not about China versus the West. It is about whether Burkina Faso can finally move higher in the global value chain and capture more of the wealth generated by its own resources. The story of Burkina Faso is not really about tariffs. It is not even primarily about China. It is about what a nation chooses to do when a rare opportunity appears. For more than 60 years, Burkina Faso exported raw materials while much of the value created from those materials was captured elsewhere. Gold left the country. Cotton left the country. Agricultural products left the country. The resources were Burkinabe, but the greatest rewards often were not. Today, the situation may be changing. China has opened a market of 1.4 billion consumers. For the first time, Burkina Faso has access to an enormous commercial opportunity with fewer barriers than ever before. But history teaches us that open markets alone do not create prosperity. Factories create prosperity. Skills create prosperity. Industrial capacity creates prosperity. That is why the actions of Ibrahim Traore matter so much in this moment. While many people focus on the open door in China, Traore has been focused on preparing what Burkina Faso will carry through that door. Gold refining, textile production, agricultural processing. These are not simply economic projects. They are attempts to keep more value inside the country and build a stronger foundation for future generations. The outcome is still uncertain. The challenges remain enormous. But for the first time in decades, Burkina Faso is trying to move beyond the role of a supplier of cheap raw materials and toward the role of a producer of higher value goods. Whether that vision succeeds or fails will shape the future of the country for years to come. And perhaps that is the lesson for Africa New, for the Pan-African movement, for the African Union, and for every nation seeking greater economic sovereignty. The goal is not simply to own resources. The goal is to transform those resources into lasting prosperity. That is the vision many supporters see in Captain Ibrahim Traore, in Burkina Faso, in Pan-Africanism, and in the broader hopes surrounding Ibrahim Traore's economic agenda. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and join us as we continue exploring the stories shaping the future of Africa. For decades, hundreds of thousands of tons of cashew nuts left Burkina Faso every year. Farmers worked hard to cultivate and harvest the crop, yet most of the value created from those nuts never stayed in the country. More than 90% of Burkina Faso's cashew production was exported in raw form, allowing foreign processors to earn the largest share of the profits. While Burkina Faso supplied the raw material, factories abroad handled processing, packaging, branding, and international distribution. As a result, thousands of potential jobs and valuable industrial opportunities were created outside the country instead of benefiting local communities. Today, that reality is beginning to change. Under the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traore, Burkina Faso has launched a new effort to process more of its agricultural resources at home. New factories are opening, struggling businesses are being revived, and investments are being directed toward creating value inside the country rather than exporting it overseas. In this report, we will examine how Burkina Faso is attempting to transform its cashew industry, and why many observers see this effort as part of a much larger economic vision. The challenge starts with the structure of the global cashew market. Burkina Faso produces between 250,000 and 300,000 tons of cashews each year, making it one of the leading producers in West Africa. Yet, for many years, the country participated mainly at the lowest level of the value chain. Once raw cashews left Burkina Faso, the most profitable stages of production took place elsewhere. Processing, packaging, and exporting finished products generated far more wealth than simply selling raw nuts. The country's new strategy seeks to reverse that pattern by keeping more jobs, skills, and economic value at home. Vietnam's dominance in the global cashew industry did not happen overnight. It was built over decades through investment, innovation, and the gradual development of an entire industrial ecosystem. Today, Vietnam is widely recognized as the world's leading cashew processing and exporting nation, a position that many producing countries have struggled to challenge. What makes Vietnam so powerful is not simply the amount of cashews it grows. In fact, a large share of the raw cashews processed in Vietnam comes from Africa. The country's real advantage lies in what happens after the harvest. Vietnamese companies have mastered large-scale processing, developed specialized machinery, trained skilled workers, and built strong relationships with international buyers. Over time, Vietnam created a complete value chain. Factories process massive volumes of cashews efficiently and at relatively low cost. Equipment manufacturers produce the machines used throughout the industry. Technical expertise continues to improve productivity, while logistics networks ensure products reach global markets quickly and reliably. This level of integration gives Vietnam a competitive advantage that is difficult to replicate. Companies can reduce production costs, maintain consistent quality, and respond quickly to changing market demand. As a result, Vietnam has become the benchmark against which other cashew processing nations are measured. For Burkina Faso, this reality presents both a challenge and an opportunity. The country is not yet competing with Vietnam on equal terms. Its processing sector remains much smaller, and many factories still depend on imported technology and equipment. However, Burkina Faso is beginning to move beyond the role of a raw material supplier. Rather than attempting to replace Vietnam, the immediate goal is to capture a larger share of the value generated from its own harvest. By expanding domestic processing capacity, Burkina Faso hopes to keep more jobs, skills, and profits within its borders. The gap remains significant, but for the first time, the country is taking concrete steps toward entering a field that Vietnam has dominated for decades. The effort to transform Burkina Faso's cashew sector cannot be understood without examining the broader economic vision promoted by Captain Ibrahim Traore. While cashew processing may seem like a narrow agricultural issue, it has become part of a much larger national conversation about economic sovereignty, industrialization, and the control of domestic resources. For decades, Burkina Faso followed a familiar pattern seen across much of Africa. Raw materials were extracted, harvested, or mined locally before being exported abroad for processing. The highest value stages of production often took place outside the country, leaving limited industrial development at home. Under Ibrahim Traore, this model has increasingly been questioned. His administration has repeatedly emphasized that Burkina Faso should not remain merely a supplier of raw commodities. Instead, agricultural products, minerals, and other resources should create jobs and industries within the country. Cashews have become one of the clearest examples of this approach, because the sector already possesses a large production base and access to international markets. Government-backed support mechanisms have played an important role in this transition. Institutions and development funds have helped struggling businesses regain stability while encouraging investment in processing capacity. Rather than focusing exclusively on exporting raw nuts, policymakers have promoted the idea of processing more of the harvest locally and developing products for both domestic and international markets. The experience of companies such as Anatrans and Burkina Faso illustrates this shift. Businesses that once faced serious operational difficulties have received support that allowed them to continue operating, expand production, and create jobs. In some cases, companies have diversified their product lines to serve consumers inside Burkina Faso instead of relying entirely on foreign buyers. Whether this strategy ultimately succeeds remains to be seen. However, the emergence of new factories and renewed investment demonstrates that industrialization is no longer being discussed only as a long-term ambition. It is increasingly becoming a visible reality. For supporters of Ibrahim Traore, these projects represent evidence that economic sovereignty begins not with speeches, but with factories, workers, and industries capable of creating value inside the nation. Among the companies helping reshape Burkina Faso's cashew industry, Burkina Faso stands out as one of the most ambitious examples. The factory represents far more than a processing facility. It reflects a broader effort to transform local agricultural production into industrial growth and long-term economic opportunity. For years, Burkina Faso exported most of its cashew harvest in raw form. The country produced the nuts, but foreign processors captured much of the value created through processing, packaging, and distribution. Burkina Faso was established to help reverse that pattern by ensuring that more of the production chain remains inside the country. The project required significant investment and coordination, built on approximately 8 hectares of land. The facility was designed with the objective of processing large quantities of cashews while creating employment opportunities for local communities. Its development was supported through cooperation between private investors and public institutions committed to expanding domestic industry. One of the most important aspects of Burkina Faso is its potential impact on employment. The project aims to generate thousands of direct and indirect jobs as operations expand. For many supporters of industrialization, this is one of the strongest arguments in favor of local processing. Every stage completed within Burkina Faso creates additional economic activity that would otherwise occur elsewhere. The factory also represents a shift in mindset. Rather than accepting the role of a raw material supplier, Burkina Faso is beginning to invest in industries capable of producing higher-value goods. This transition requires capital, infrastructure, skilled workers, and long-term planning. But Burkina Faso demonstrates that such projects are becoming increasingly possible. While one factory alone cannot transform an entire sector, it can serve as a model for future investments. Burkina Faso shows how local resources can be linked to industrial development, creating a foundation for greater economic independence and stronger domestic production in the years ahead. While Burkina Faso represents a new generation of industrial investment, it is not the only company contributing to the transformation of Burkina Faso's cashew sector. The experiences of Anatrans and Gabana reveal how different business models are helping build a stronger domestic processing industry. Anatrans has become one of the most important examples of industrial recovery. After facing serious financial difficulties that threatened its future, the company received support that allowed operations to continue and expand. Today, the factory employs approximately 1,300 workers, and around 90% of them are women. This makes Anatrans not only an economic success story, but also a significant social initiative. The company has gone beyond simple job creation. It has provided opportunities for internally displaced people and widows of soldiers who lost their lives defending the country. By linking industrial development with social inclusion, Anatrans demonstrates how manufacturing can contribute to broader national goals. The company has also diversified its products. In addition to traditional cashew kernels, it introduced new flavors aimed at the domestic market. This strategy reflects a growing effort to develop local consumption rather than relying entirely on exports. Another important project is the Gabana Industrial Complex in Peni. Designed to process both cashews and mangoes, the facility represents a major investment in agricultural transformation. The cashew unit alone is expected to process around 10,000 tons annually, while the dried mango operation targets international markets. The project is also expected to create approximately 1,800 direct jobs. Together, Anatrans and Gabana illustrate a broader trend. Burkina Faso is no longer focusing solely on increasing agricultural production. It is increasingly investing in processing industries that create employment, transfer technical skills, and generate greater economic value. These projects may differ in size and structure, but they share the same objective, ensuring that more of the wealth generated from Burkina Faso's agricultural resources remains within the country and benefits its people. The transformation of Burkina Faso's cashew industry is promising, but it would be a mistake to view it as an easy success story. Behind every new factory and every announcement of investment lies a series of challenges that continue to test the country's ambitions. One of the biggest obstacles is access to certified raw materials. Many processing companies depend on cashews that meet strict international standards. However, obtaining and maintaining certifications can be expensive for local cooperatives. Without a reliable supply of certified nuts, factories may struggle to operate at full capacity. Another challenge is technology. Many processing facilities still rely on imported machinery, spare parts, and technical expertise. This dependence increases costs and can slow production whenever equipment requires maintenance or replacement. Compared with established processing powers such as Vietnam, Burkina Faso remains at an earlier stage of industrial development. Competition also remains intense. Countries with decades of experience possess larger factories, stronger export networks, and lower production costs. Burkina Faso is not yet in a position to challenge those advantages directly. Instead, its immediate goal is to build a foundation for future growth. Despite these difficulties, the social impact of the industry's expansion is already visible. Factories are creating opportunities for women, young people, and vulnerable communities. New jobs provide income, skills, and greater economic stability for thousands of families. The broader significance extends beyond Burkina Faso. Across Africa, many countries continue to export raw materials while importing finished products. The Burkinabe experience suggests an alternative path. Rather than focusing only on production, governments can encourage processing, manufacturing, and value creation at home. The debate surrounding this strategy has also attracted international attention. Some critics question whether such policies can succeed in a highly competitive global economy. Supporters respond that every nation has the right to seek greater control over its resources and a larger share of the value they generate. In that sense, the discussion is about far more than cashews. It is about the future direction of economic development across Africa. Burkina Faso has not replaced Vietnam as the world's leading cashew processor, and no serious observer would claim that it has. The gap in technology, industrial experience, and global market reach remains substantial. Yet the story unfolding today is important precisely because it is not about instant victory. It is about changing direction. For decades, the country supplied raw cashews while much of the value created from those crops flowed elsewhere. Today, new factories, new investments, and new industrial policies are beginning to alter that reality. Companies such as Burkina Faso, Anatrans, and Gabana demonstrate that local processing is no longer just an aspiration. It is becoming part of Burkina Faso's economic landscape. The broader lesson extends beyond the cashew sector. It raises a fundamental question for resource-producing nations across Africa. Should countries remain exporters of raw materials, or should they build industries capable of creating value at home? Burkina Faso's current strategy reflects a belief that long-term prosperity depends on the second option. Supporters of Captain Ibrahim Traore argue that economic sovereignty begins when nations process more of what they produce and keep more wealth within their own borders. Whether one views this through the lens of Pan-African development, Pan-Africanism, or national industrial policy, the objective remains similar: creating opportunities that benefit local populations. As Burkina Faso continues this journey, the outcome will be closely watched across the continent. The future of Africa's new industrial ambitions may depend on how successfully countries transform resources into industries, and industries into prosperity. From the perspective of the African Union and many advocates of economic independence, the debate is no longer whether change is needed. The question is how quickly it can happen. Ibrahim Traore and Burkina Faso have chosen their answer. If you believe Africa's future will be shaped by industrialization rather than raw exports, share your thoughts below and subscribe for more stories from across the continent. For years, Captain Ibrahim Traore has been known as the leader standing at the center of Burkina Faso's fight against terrorism. His name has often been associated with military operations, national security, and the effort to restore stability across the country. But in 2026, a different kind of battle is beginning to attract attention. This new battle is not being fought with weapons. It is being fought with knowledge, savings, investment, and economic participation. The Second International African Stock Exchange Fair, known as CBE 2026, has introduced a conversation that goes far beyond finance. At the heart of the event is a simple but powerful question. Who should finance the future of Burkina Faso foreign institutions and outside investors? Or the people of Burkina Faso themselves? Supporters of this vision believe that true sovereignty extends beyond national borders. They argue that a country cannot be fully independent if it depends heavily on external funding to build its future. This is why CBE 2026 has attracted attention as more than a financial gathering. For many observers, it represents a new front in the broader struggle for economic sovereignty. If you enjoy learning about the major transformations shaping Africa today, make sure to subscribe to the channel and follow our future reports. To understand why this idea is gaining momentum, it is important to look at the challenges facing Burkina Faso. Since 2022, the country has devoted significant resources to security and reconstruction efforts. These priorities require substantial funding, yet military victories alone cannot guarantee long-term independence. A nation may secure its territory while remaining financially dependent on others. This reality has led to growing discussions about economic sovereignty, where protecting national interests means not only defending land, but also strengthening the ability to finance development through domestic resources and citizen participation. CBE 2026 was presented under a simple but highly strategic theme: financial markets and financial inclusion. The central question was equally straightforward. How can the stock market be brought closer to ordinary people? For decades, financial markets across much of Africa have often been viewed as spaces reserved for wealthy investors, large corporations, and financial professionals. Many citizens have never owned a share, purchased a bond, or participated in any formal investment activity. As a result, millions of people save money without ever becoming part of the broader economic growth that their savings could help create. This is precisely the challenge that SIBA 2026 seeks to address. According to the organizers, the objective is not merely to promote stock exchanges. It is to change perceptions. The event aims to demonstrate that investment opportunities should not be limited to a privileged few. Instead, financial participation should be accessible to students preparing for their future, farmers seeking greater financial security, market traders building small businesses, and workers hoping to create long-term wealth for their families. This represents a significant shift in thinking. Rather than focusing exclusively on attracting foreign investors, the discussion increasingly centers on empowering domestic investors. The goal is to help citizens understand how financial markets work and how they can participate responsibly. For supporters of this approach, every citizen who learns to invest becomes more than a saver. That person becomes a contributor to national development. Small investments, when multiplied across thousands or even millions of people, can help finance businesses, infrastructure projects, and economic growth. In this sense, SIB 2026 is more than a financial exhibition. It is an effort to democratize investment and transform ordinary citizens into active participants in building Burkina Faso's economic future. One of the most important ideas behind Burkina Faso's emerging economic strategy is the belief that savings should not remain idle. Across Africa, millions of people save money every month. They put aside small amounts from salaries, business income, farming activities, or family support. Yet, much of this money never reaches the productive sectors of the economy. This creates a significant gap between personal savings and national development. Supporters of financial inclusion argue that when savings are transformed into investments, they become a powerful engine for growth. Instead of remaining inactive, these resources can help finance roads, energy projects, housing developments, schools, and businesses that create jobs. This philosophy is visible in Burkina Faso's recent efforts to mobilize resources from its citizens and its diaspora. One notable example is the Diaspora Bonds Initiative, which seeks to encourage Burkinabe living abroad to contribute directly to national development through structured investment programs. Rather than relying exclusively on external lenders, the country is exploring ways to channel the commitment and financial capacity of its own people. The significance of this approach extends beyond the amount of money raised. It represents a different vision of development. A worker living overseas is no longer viewed simply as someone sending money home to relatives. That individual can also become an investor in national infrastructure and economic transformation. Even relatively small investments can have meaningful collective impact when participation becomes widespread. Thousands of citizens contributing modest amounts may ultimately generate resources capable of supporting major development projects. For advocates of economic sovereignty, this is where the real power lies. National development becomes a shared responsibility rather than a process driven primarily by foreign capital. In that sense, every saver has the potential to become a nation builder, and every investment can become a contribution to the future of Burkina Faso. Many experts believe that financial education may be the most important element of any long-term strategy for economic sovereignty. A country can create investment opportunities, launch financial programs, and encourage citizen participation. However, if people do not understand how money works, these efforts will have limited impact. This challenge is not unique to Burkina Faso. Across many countries, people spend years studying mathematics, history, science, and literature without ever receiving practical education about savings, investing, risk management, or wealth creation. As adults, they are expected to make important financial decisions despite having little formal preparation. This is one reason why discussions at SIBA 2026 have extended beyond stock markets and investment products. There is growing interest in promoting financial literacy among younger generations and introducing financial education into schools and universities. The goal is not to turn every student into a stock trader. Instead, it is to help future citizens understand fundamental concepts that can improve their economic security. Learning how investments work, understanding the relationship between risk and return, and recognizing the importance of long-term planning can empower individuals throughout their lives. For young entrepreneurs, financial knowledge can improve business decisions. For workers, it can support retirement planning. For families, it can help build greater stability across generations. Supporters of this approach argue that economic development begins with informed citizens. Roads, factories, and infrastructure remain important, but human knowledge is equally valuable. A population that understands finance is better equipped to save, invest, and participate in national growth. In the long run, the most significant achievement may not be the number of people who purchase stocks or bonds. It may be the creation of a generation capable of making informed financial decisions and taking greater control of its economic future. As Burkina Faso advances its vision of economic sovereignty, not everyone is convinced that the path will be easy. Critics, particularly in parts of the Western media and policy community, have raised concerns about governance, political freedoms, and the long-term stability of the country's institutions. Some observers argue that strong economic ambitions must be accompanied by strong democratic institutions, transparent regulations, and reliable legal protections. From this perspective, attracting investment requires more than patriotic enthusiasm. It requires confidence that financial markets will operate fairly, and that investors will have access to accurate information. These concerns deserve consideration. A successful financial market depends heavily on trust. Citizens will only invest their savings if they believe their money is protected, and if they understand the risks involved. Transparency, accountability, and effective oversight are therefore essential components of any strategy designed to expand public participation in finance. At the same time, supporters of Burkina Faso's current direction argue that many international discussions focus heavily on political controversies while paying less attention to efforts aimed at increasing domestic economic participation. They point out that encouraging citizens to invest, promoting financial education, and mobilizing local savings are legitimate development goals that deserve serious examination. The debate, therefore, is not simply about politics, it is also about development strategy. Can a country strengthen economic sovereignty while improving transparency and investor confidence at the same time? This may be one of the most important questions facing Burkina Faso in the years ahead. If the country succeeds, it could demonstrate that domestic capital and citizen participation can play a larger role in national development. If it fails, critics will argue that ambitious rhetoric alone cannot replace the institutions required for long-term financial growth. The challenge is not choosing between sovereignty and transparency. The real challenge is ensuring that both advance together. The discussion taking place in Burkina Faso extends far beyond one country. Across Africa, governments continue to face a common challenge. Development requires capital. Yet access to financing often depends heavily on external loans, foreign investment, and international institutions. This reality has led many policymakers to ask whether a greater share of development could be financed through domestic resources. In this context, Burkina Faso's efforts offer several lessons that may interest other African nations. The first lesson is the importance of mobilizing local savings. Every country possesses financial resources within its own population. While individual contributions may appear small, collective participation can create significant pools of capital capable of supporting national priorities. The second lesson involves financial education. Citizens cannot participate effectively in financial markets if they do not understand the basic principles of investing, risk management, and long-term wealth creation. Expanding financial literacy may therefore be just as important as creating new investment products. A third lesson concerns trust. No market can thrive without confidence. Governments seeking to attract domestic investors must demonstrate transparency, accountability, and responsible management of public resources. Citizens are